This is the Content and AI Podcast, episode number 5. When you think of the iconic furniture retailer IKEA, leading edge technology may not be the first thing that pops into your mind, but it should. Like most enterprises now, IKEA is exploring the many ways that LLMs, machine learning, knowledge graphs, and other AI technologies can help them sell more furniture and understand their business better. Tane Piper leads an engineering team at IKEA that's building their next generation of content and artificial intelligence tooling.
Welcome to the Content and AI Podcast, where experts on artificial intelligence share their wisdom with the content community. Our mission is to demystify and democratize AI, to make its principles and practices accessible to all content practitioners. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 5 of the Content and AI Podcast. I'm really delighted today to welcome to the show Tane Piper. Tane is a software engineering leader at Inter IKEA. And that's the first thing I want to ask you about, Tane, is like IKEA is this big, sprawling, complex organization. Tell me about Inter IKEA and how that fits in with the overall IKEA brand.
Thanks, Larry. So Inter IKEA, as many people know, you go to IKEA, you go to a shop, but not what a lot of people don't know is it's actually a franchise system. So Inter IKEA is the owner of the IKEA concept. So it owns the furniture side, the range we call it, the supply, and also the retail concept, which is where I work. So we come up with the ideas behind IKEA, how the store works, what the concept is when you go to an IKEA store, this kind of Swedishness of it all. And when you as a customer go to the store, you're mostly dealing with the franchisor. So franchisee, sorry. So somebody who is working with us to build the IKEA brand in a new market.
That's it. And having like responsibility for the retail concept of one of the most iconic brands in the world, there's absolutely no pressure in this job, I'm going to guess.
Oh, no pressure at all. No, in some way, yes and no. I mean, yes, it's a big task. We are a very big, well-known brand around the world. But inside, when we're working on things, I think we're pretty normal. We talk about pretty normal things day to day. I mean, at the moment, why I'm here with you today, we talk about things like content and AI and how we can use these to leverage them to improve not only the lives of our customers, the many people, but also what we do day to day.
Right. So it's like, and that's the thing about AI is it's so sprawling, and especially in a big enterprise like IKEA, it's going to be everywhere. But let's start, actually I want to start because where we met a couple of years ago at the Knowledge Graph conference in New York City. And we were talking then about knowledge graphs and knowledge representation and that. And we've subsequently talked about like the work that Adam and Katarina are doing up in Sweden with the knowledge graph and all that stuff. But there's so much more going on. Can you talk a little bit about the scope? Like I know that they're doing like the recommendation system that's driven by the knowledge graph, but there's so much else going on. Can you kind of give a quick overview of how AI technologies are manifesting at IKEA?
Oh, absolutely. I think in many layers we're looking at it. I think when you think about what AI is, I mean, it's AI is a kind of catch-all term for a lot of things. So I mean, on one end, you have machine learning. So where we're really looking at existing things like lots of unstructured content, for example. In terms of an organization, we have lots of things in PowerPoints and PDF files that can be you can be understood by using something like machine learning. And then, very much on the other side with generative AI, certainly the opportunities that are there, the kind of future opportunities of doing things like home furnishing recommendations and doing that in such a way that the machine understands the customer context, like the size of the room or where they are, and can tailor and help to give the right recommendations based on that. With that knowledge graph at the bottom, I think that's the thing that when we talk about AI and machine learning, especially with a lot of the LLM stuff that is coming along, is we know that's very unstructured, unattributed. So by having that kind of ground reality with the knowledge graph, that's really what we are kind of looking to build upon, at least in the area where I work, which is with content as well. So I mean, there's lots of we have a group inside where it's a bit more informal, it's an informal kind of group, but we chat across multiple areas in the business, and I think we're all kind of looking at how can we bring AI to different parts of the business, because there are different use cases, and what use case works for our area does not necessarily work for, say, supply.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess the one that comes to mind immediately for a lot of people, because it's been all the fuss for the last year, is the generative AI stuff. And the famous thing about that is that proneness to hallucinations and things like that, and when you're running a brand like IKEA, it's really important to not hallucinate in your communication. And you talked a minute ago about the knowledge graph as like the sort of the grounding your information in reality. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how you can benefit from, because I'm assuming you can benefit from technologies like generative AI, but still maintain your brand and maintain the accuracy of the information you're sharing?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I like that what we've done is we've not necessarily rushed into building a lot of stuff with AI and really like going all in with it in many ways. And I think what that's allowing us to do is, as an organization and as a brand, look at, what is it we need to do to ensure going forward that there isn't anything that can harm the brand perception or harm the brand itself. I mean, out there are already things like somebody created a model that allows you to create like IKEA style manuals for things, and it's a specific model to do that. That kind of stuff is very difficult to say what effect it would have on the brand, but I think as long as people understand it's not coming from IKEA, I think that's the thing is, when you put a brand out there like that, it becomes the people have a bit more of that brand themselves. So I think that's the thing we have to take away from it. But obviously there is protection of the brand, and yes, we have to look at how when we bring these generative AI services in, especially where people will be having conversations with them, putting those guardrails in there that mean that, if you're talking to a home furnishing bot or agent, you're only getting home furnishing information. It's not going to give you information on philosophy or science or anything like that. It's kind of keeping within the bounds of what it should be doing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned both a minute ago when you were talking about machine learning, the benefits of learning from what you already have. And then as you just mentioned that, like that kind of understanding of the world you operate in, like how machines. So tell me about the relationship between, understanding your current, because you have not only like product information that we all see on the web, but there's tons of information that I forget what you call them, but the folks working in the stores and other enterprise employees at IKEA use. Can you talk a little bit about that ecosystem and kind of like how AI and ML sort of interact as you're both understanding and generating content?
Yeah. But I think when you bring up, say, for example, the coworker, because like I mentioned before, we're a franchise system, then we have to train people on that system, and we have to train coworkers on how to work in an IKEA store and what the range is and what the products are. So you could think of a generative AI system that is connected to that information, where the coworker can start having a conversation, based on maybe a customer's needs. A customer comes up and says, I have a bathroom that has this certain style, this certain size, what can help me here? The coworker no longer needs to, in some way, dig into their own knowledge or keep up with everything in the product range. They should now be able to go to an agent and ask questions based on this. But again, it has to be based in reality. It has to be based on the information that's available. And certainly there's a lot of learning is part of what we would call the franchise offer. We have to not only bring the products, the brand, but the learning as well. So with that, yes, there's a lot of potential for. I think when we call it Gen AI, I think even here we're going to start seeing a distinction, which is fully generative, which is things like DALI and stability AI and all these kind of things that are, generating images and doing things like that. But then there's this other layer, which is the agent layer, where it's generative because the computer is having to do the stochastic work, but the output is more based on working with facts, if that makes sense. So it's not so much the creative side of things, but actually working within the boundaries of the box so that you have as your data set. So, outside of IKEA, you can think of another industry or another retailer, or whatever, they're going to have something very similar. How do you work within the boundaries of our brand, what we do as a company, how we interact with customers? I think we're going to see a lot of businesses focusing more on that area, maybe more than, say, the generative AI that we're seeing from as a popular generative AI right now.
Got it. You remind me of, I had a couple episodes back, I had Paco Nathan on. I don't know if you met him at KGC, but he's insanely knowledgeable about this stuff. And he's just been going to all the AI conferences, talking to everybody. And he kind of shared some take-homes that he's learned over the last 6 months or so, one of which was the benefits of small specialized models over large models. Is that kind of what's going on at IKEA? When you mentioned learning from your own corpus and stuff.
So this is more going into my maybe opinions on this stuff now, and certainly this is something I've talked about internally, which is, yes, as a company, first of all, for us to have that brand protection, we should know what the models we're using are. So I mean, if you go with a ChatGPT model from OpenAI, as we know at the moment, we don't really know where all the attribution is. We don't know, what material in there is potentially copyright versus non-copyright material or out of copyright material. And I think this is where I call them kind of one-shots, but I guess this is small, very focused models that are trained on very specific things, like home furnishing, for example. So when you do that, you can create these agents that become very knowledgeable in that area, but not in a bigger context. In some sense, you have to still give them meaning, or I don't want to say it's not like, because these things are not sentient, but you have to have that conversational style with them. So they still have to understand conversation, not just the pure data of what they're working with. So I think there is definitely work to be done to have these smaller models and not go for big investments in infrastructure that can be sitting around doing nothing for a very long time and then being very computationally expensive when you run them. I think it's better that we look at having pipelines that generate these models that are much more focused and smaller. I mean, for me, my kind of, I guess, thinking of where this could go is actually, maybe it's like technical side, but for example, if you think of Docker, when you generate a Docker image, you have this base image and then you kind of apply the layers on top of it. And I think it would be this, if we could get to something with large language models like that, where you have this base model, which is very small, understands conversation, but maybe doesn't understand context. And then you build the context on top of it. And for a business like us, who, we release products several times a year, we have to keep building on that knowledge. So, but the knowledge that needs to be added on is not huge. It's just that little delta from the last year. For example, if you think about a year of information. So if we can get to a place where that kind of work is easier to apply, I think then these models become much more economical and much more trustworthy. I think that's the other part as well, is we need to look at the trustworthiness. I mean, when I did a talk a couple of months ago with our GPT interest group, as we call it, that I think my focus was that, as a business, we are in the EU and we have a lot of EU regulation coming up around the Digital Services Act, AI Act, but also on the industry side, lots of things around sustainability, traceability of products, for example. And this is where both a knowledge graph and the AI systems can work together, I think, quite well. But to do that, yeah, we should be very pragmatic. We shouldn't spend a lot of money in terms of infrastructure, and also we need to make sure that the testing is good as well. That we test these things regularly for drift, and that we kind of make sure that that there's a way for us to make sure they're not going to have any effect on the brand or on the business at all.
Yeah, and that grounding in facts is one of the ways you do that. One thing I wanted to back up a little bit about that, because we had a conversation, I don't know, several months ago about your work, and I think we talked to KGC about this, about how the knowledge graph that they're working on, the folks up in Malmo were working on, interacts with one of the CMSs that you're running in here in the Netherlands. And that, I think this is especially for my technical content people, the more content engineering folks, they're going to be really interested in that, because I think that's just sort of a specific technical implementation of a knowledge graph that injects facts, into your CMS. Can you talk? Can you talk a little bit about that, or?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of so the team I'm specifically running is this modular content delivery. I mean, that's what we have kind of been looking at in terms of we can't, I think this is where things are changing in the industry. I mean, we want to reduce cost, the amount of data we're transferring over networks and things, but also just get to a better way to deliver the kind of factual content that we need to be able to deliver to our co-workers, to our customers. And working with the knowledge graph, what we're doing is connecting those taxonomy values to content that is being produced. So when you produce a piece of content, you could say what if you were thinking of a customer facing piece of content, maybe you tag it with a room. So we have an instance of the room in the knowledge graph, like a living room. We have an instance of a style, and we have an instance of an activity maybe that you want to do. And based on that, then the content that's tagged with that now becomes searchable through the knowledge graph, because so your content intelligence is improved because you understand more about your landscape of your content. But now you have that can now also be fed into the language with the language models, so that you get that contextual information from your conversation. You go to the knowledge graph, you try find your semantic reasoning from that, and then from there you can go and fetch the content around that. So I think we're seeing there that by putting the knowledge graph at the heart, it connects to so many services and systems. You can now, by having an instance of something in a knowledge graph, connect it not only to the content but to the analytics of the content or the metrics of the content, so that now you can actually have a full view of that content lifecycle. Where's it being used, how is it being used, but also later, if you want to find content based on, say, products being refreshed, maybe you want to find some old content and remix it. That content findability, I think, is one of the key things of using the knowledge graph. And then I think this is where LLMs, like, people are using them as a search engine. They're not a search engine, but if you give it the right information and the right function, it can help with searching for information. For example, I'm doing a talk later this week in Brussels, and I used ChatGPT to find information for me. I switched the Bing mode on, and I said, you're a speechwriter in Europe. I need to find some information on some European policies around sustainability, around around like using customer data. And then I said, okay, now we have a client called IKEA who are coming in. We want to also find some information related to what IKEA do in this area. And it went out and it found the stuff for me. It gave me references. So maybe in about 2 hours, I compiled the outline of the talk with references. If I had to do that myself, and had to use Google to search for this, to find the right things, I'd have to read the whole paper to make sure that it's relevant. Maybe, I can read the extract and maybe understand it. but maybe when I deep dive into it, there's nothing relevant in there. But by using the chat GPT to do that work for me, I think that's something that a lot of business users will benefit from, especially. I mean, developers, we can put code into it all day, it will find bugs, we can help it, get it to write tests and things. But we're on that early part of the bell curve anyway. We know about this stuff, we understand it, or think we understand it, we're playing with it, and we get it. But for business users at the moment, they're maybe looking at it and having some fun with the generative AI stuff, but they don't yet know the power of what can come with this when you connect it to your data.
Yeah, that's my hope in this podcast, is to get more people more attuned to the full range of benefits from AI technologies in content practice. You just mentioned a couple things that fall out of what you're doing, like reuse and discovery. That's like huge in a lot of content operations, especially in technical stuff. But you also mentioned the analytics, and I'm really intrigued by that, because it just frustrates me to know that most of what we talk about content analytics is page level web analytics. Are you doing fancier stuff than that now, or?
I think when we think about the business of IKEA, it's only successful because of the people. Like, if you go to a store and there's no people, then there's no success, because we're not able to sell anything. So knowing like how, for example, learning is being consumed, how learning is being engaged with, there's quantitative stuff that you can get from systems there. You can plug them in and create data metrics from that, and then you can provide it as dashboards to people who need them. I think where it becomes interesting for me is where, up until now, especially, a lot of analytics has been thought of as very quantitative, like it's just numbers. The interesting future with this is how you bring the qualitative part back into this, and actually how you work. I mean, you could imagine, for example, one of my things about learning is it's not only just contextual, but it's contextual to the person that day. Imagine if at the beginning of before every training course that somebody does, you just say, how are you feeling today? In a good mood, a bad mood, how was your commute? Just a couple of questions. And then based on that, you can maybe get some sentiment from people as well. You can understand that, if people have a bad commute and a bad day, then they learn terribly. But you can verify that now. I think that's the thing, is where we're seeing bringing in some of the more quantitative elements. And, we have a big learning organization, but there's always more to learn. There's always better ways to optimize things. But that's just one area. I mean, when we talk about bringing metrics in, it's across, how quickly can we optimize supply chain? How quickly can we improve getting stuff out to the customer? How quickly can we improve customer service? There's lots of areas there where I think what my opinion of metrics in the last 20 years is that we've gone down this route of gather everything, almost like an NSA type thing, where it's like, have all the information and then we're just going to run all this stuff off this information. But then we have so much information that it doesn't actually give you that much that you can get out of it. I'm trying to
no, it's funny. You're reminding me of why I feel semi-safe online, is because I'm aware that I'm just lost in this morass of information that all the big orgs are trying to figure out.
But it's also, it's costly for a business. It's not only costly in terms of storage, moving data around, but costly in terms of brand effect. If something happened and some of that data got leaked out, and then suddenly somebody was releasing information about customers, then that's not great. So we need to, I think, actually going forward, one of the things that AI or at least the machine learning and LLMs might help with is actually reducing the volume of data that we need to store and collect. I think there's routes there that will help with that. I don't know if it will happen right away. I think a lot of businesses are going through a kind of, now you don't have Google Analytics. Actually, a lot of places are like, we don't have this data coming in now. We have no visibility on this stuff. But I would bet if you spoke to them and asked them, when you had all this vast amount of data, what were you really getting out of it? What were you really able to understand and target and improve in the business from what you had there? And if it's more just a case that they've gone from having visibility of something to no visibility, what's the key things you're missing? And then think about that and take that forward. Because actually, you probably don't need to know every piece of sensor data from a customer. You just need to know, are they completing a certain journey or something like that?
As you say that, I'm really interested in I'm thinking of that data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. And I think what you're saying is a lot of that data at the bottom is just kind of data points that support a piece of information or knowledge that we've discerned. And once you've codified it as information or knowledge, you can just get rid of the data that supported that. Is that?
Exactly. It's just static noise that sits around. And yeah, I think, unless you, for archival and historical reasons, maybe need to keep some data around, that there's some cases there, but for most stuff you don't. And when it comes to Germany here in the EU, I mean, that's usually a big black box of data because you're not allowed to get the data out of Germany, for example. So, that hits every business across, and especially in retail across Europe, is a lot of the time you don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, everybody loves it. Hey, one thing I quickly want to ask about, you've mentioned a few times, in things that remind me that one of the benefits of these LLMs and the generative AIs, you almost always interact them with a conversational interface, like a chat bot kind of thing.
Yes.
Has that changed content practice at IKEA? Are there more like conversation designers or folks around, or how is that manifesting?
Not yet. I think that's something that as we take the time to do this, is learning what is it we need. I mean, I'm involved in a small work group around the generative AI stuff, and I think we'll have to come up with our prompts. I just the other day, I think the Open AI prompt came out. It showed you what they feed to ChatGPT before you even put anything in there. Don't create any art from anyone past 1912, I think it is. So, if you put an artist name who's been producing art after 1912, it will say, I can't do that, but here's something like it, or here's some suggestive type way of doing it. And I think it's the same for us, is we'll have to have our prompts for certain areas that we have to work out. So I think you're right. It's become a conversationalist. Yeah, I think we call it prompt engineering right now, but I think in the long run, it's a very a kind of crass name for just basically, making sure that when you deal with this system and when you're interacting with it, that it doesn't go off. You're trying to get it to not go off the rails. I think, there's no pretense that this thing is in any way sentient. I think there's an argument to say consciousness. I think what we mean by consciousness is more like it's able to take sensory information, which you're providing it, and make a reasoning based on that. So, I mean, you could call that an element of consciousness, but it's not a sentient creature. But it understands context. It understands meaning. It can get confused. Of course it can. And you can definitely take it around in circles. But what human is not like that? What human has never just said random things in the middle of a conversation, or misunderstood what you've said and gone on a completely different tangent? It's, these things, I think that's the thing for me, is LLMs are just a mirror of society in general, because we feed that information in there, and that's where, unfortunately, biases and misinformation can creep into the system. But then the second half of it is you have to have a human to interact with it. I mean, back last year, I did the stochastic parrot. I think it's still online, stochasticparrot.lol, where I just gave GPT empty prompts and it just generated stuff. It just kept from empty prompts, just kept generating and generating. And that, I think, made me realize there's a technique called like a Markov chain. It's where you feed a lot of text into a program, and then the program picks a word, and then it does the stochastic choosing. OpenAI ChatGPT is nothing more fancy than that, except it has a lot more information, and then it has some additional things behind it to help with context and understanding. But the general system is just, it has to have a starting point. So the starting point is the human asking the question, and then from there it will it builds on that context. And I do see from my wife using it. She's does a lot of stuff around behavioral stuff with this, and she's playing with it, and it's about being nice with it. It's about having a conversation with it, and it's an iteration. So it's almost like a client relationship in some way. You're working with somebody, and it's almost like a digital whiteboarding of an idea or a concept, and see how far you can take it.
You're reminding me of, I can't remember who it was, somebody in the knowledge graph community. We were talking about the human in the loop. They go, no, it's the machine in the loop. And I'm kind of taking home a similar lesson from what you just said, that like, it's just conversation, and we're probably better at it than LLMs at this point, but they're getting really good at at least the language part of it. But hey, Tane, I can't believe it. We're coming up close to time already. Before we wrap up though, is there anything last that you want to revisit from the conversation, or just want to make sure we get to before we close?
I think just to go back and kind of what we've been doing for maybe the past year is, you've maybe seen some stuff in the press about, IKEA doing some stuff with AI. And I think that is, like I say, the retailer side of things are kind of doing some experimentation around that. But as a company at the core of the brand and the business, I think what we're doing is really taking a pragmatic approach here of what benefits can we, as not a tech company, at the end I might have engineering leader in my title, but at the end of the day I sell furniture. That's my job. That's what the enablement is in what we do. So how do we as a business benefit from that without the negative consequences of using this stuff? We know it takes a lot of resources to run these things. We know that they hallucinate and drift. We know that there's legislation that's coming up that will hit us very hard if we do this wrong. So taking all of those things into account, I think we, inside the area we are, really thinking, what's the future of this that we can take forward and bring benefits for many people, and not just for a few. And I think if we can help solve that problem, if we can be part of the solution, I think I'd be very happy to see that kind of work coming from us. I think I'm quite outspoken sometimes when it comes to some of like what the other people in this area are doing, and especially with some more of the kind of tech bro type companies where they're pushing out all this stuff without thinking about the consequences. And I think that's the key part, is if you're in a big business, think about the consequences, because the potential harm to come from these systems without the right understanding, without the right guardrails, it puts a lot of things at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Closing on that pragmatic business focused level, that like, because the tech guys, they'll sell you anything you'll buy though. Hey, one very last thing, Tane, if folks want to follow you online or connect, what's the best way to reach you?
These days, LinkedIn. You can find me there. Feel free to connect. Feel free to send me a message if you have any questions. I usually try to respond within a couple of days. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone in the space who's interested in finding out a bit more.
Well, thanks so much, Tane. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
For show notes and to sign up for our newsletter, visit our website at contentandai.com. And please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.